The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. And today I'm happy to have one of my online friends. We were just talking a moment ago about how we haven't met in person as far as I know, have we?
No, we've never
Uh,
met in person yet. I've seen your book for years. I carried your book around with me for years.
It's another happy category for those of us that have anything to do with near-death experience and consciousness and afterlife and all of that. You begin to have relationships around the world with people, some of whom you might see at a conference or something, but we haven't even done that yet. But
Yes.
anyway, this is Lisa Smartt. Uh, she is lots of things, and we'll go into a lot of what they are. Um, I knew you. I met you through Raymond Moody, and you worked with him for like maybe a dozen years or so, or
Wow, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, just about a dozen years. You hit the nail on the head.
yeah. But you, I think, caught each other's interest because of your work on the words of the dying or verbalizations, attempts at speech of people who are dying, and it was just a field sitting there unstudied. That
Thank you.
no, that you're not. You're on my show. You talk all you want.
Um, but no, I had this inspiration when I was with my father as he was dying. My background was in linguistics and I loved cognitive linguistics. But I never thought, I thought, icky, icky, end of life. I was someone who I was teaching English and, writing, but I just never thought I would be in this field. But I had a background in linguistics and studied it, very intensively at Berkeley. And then what happened? My father went through a very intensive 3-week period of dying, and I was blown out of the water by what I heard him say. He was an absolute skeptic, atheist, and I listened to his word patterns change. He started talking about angels in the room. He started talking these beautiful, intriguing metaphors about travel. He knew when he was going to die. He announced to me that in 3 days he was going to go. So much language. And as a linguist, someone who loved language, I wrote down everything he said and was intrigued and excited, confused, a little scared. I'd never been at the bedside of someone dying so closely. It was my first really bedside experience. And then after he passed, I was like, what the heck did I just witness? The heck was that? So I went up the street to UC Berkeley, where I got my degree, and I went to the linguistics department and said, you guys, I just saw something amazing. I want to study it. We know tons about the language of children. When we know a lot about uh, the acquisition of language in children and toddlers, but do we know anything about how language unravels or changes at the end of life? And they looked at me like, "Are you crazy? What do
Yeah.
you know
Well, when
about?"
you're a trailblazer, you can be called crazy pretty easily. But I remember I was only learning about you, and I love language and words also, and I knew it was true. People watch babies and toddlers so carefully because they're so cute. And when you watch them try to do a thing that they don't know how to do yet, and they do it clumsily or whatnot, it's cute watching them, and then you want to applaud their every little bit of progress, or they called me mama today or something like that. But yeah, you're right. I hadn't ever heard of anybody focusing on last words or words as you leave, something like that.
I love the way you framed it too about, with little kids, every piece of language that we hear is precious and we treat
Yeah.
it sacredly. And because I think we know that it's going to be the language that brings them throughout the rest of their lives, because we all know, in most cases, children are going to go on to grow and use language throughout. But many times many people think when they hear the language of the dying, it's not a precursor to something that's coming on next. Childhood language is foreshadows the language of a lifetime. So it's beautiful and magical and intriguing. The feeling is as I did this research, what I've discovered, because I was not, I mean, I definitely had a spiritual bone in my body, of course, but I was not convinced in any way that that consciousness continues. But so I think what's so scary about the language that we hear as people are dying, when it sounds awkward or clumsy or all kind of the way you had portrayed it in children, we're terrified because we think something's unraveling and we've lost something precious. But really, a lot of what we hear at end of life potentially is kind of a foreshadowing and the opening of another door to a different, and so anyway, I love the way you framed it, kind of the wonder we have with children, but we haven't really been encouraged or supported in thinking that way of the life,
Well,
the life.
especially if you start from a frame of mind that death ends everything, um, then it might not be that interesting about what a person said at the end, because who cares? They're not here anymore. They don't exist anymore. Uh,
Exactly.
Well, before we get any deeper, would you kind of take us through the whole story arc of your life, where you got started, what it was like to be you growing up, how you ended up being interested in the things that interested you in college and in your career?
You know, we all have so many threads in our lives. Let me think just about language. I had some challenging things in my childhood, like many of us do. I had challenges, some hard knocks
And where was that?
in Berkeley.
In Berkeley.
And
Okay.
it was a time of revolution and openness and no boundaries. And my parents were both kind of hippies and uh, weren't very good at boundaries. So let's just say it was like mom and dad. Anyway, I don't think I'll go in that much detail, but it was a time where boundaries were loosened and the life of a child was not always understood and respected in
Were
terms
you
of
the only child? Did you have
only
siblings?
child. Both of my parents were artists.
Uh-huh.
And the blessing of being their daughter is they taught me to think creatively and openly, and my father loved language, but because I had some really challenging things happen in my childhood, I had to go inside of myself somewhere else to find solace and comfort. I remember I got so scared at night, sometimes I would sleep in the closet
Uh-huh.
because I was so afraid as a child.
Uh-huh.
What I remember most about sleeping in the closet because I was so afraid is I would get a flashlight and I would write. I would write. And I
Uh-huh.
realized that there was this magical thing that could happen is we could have all these feelings and all this stuff that felt really overwhelming. And with a pencil or a pen in our hand and a page, in those days there weren't computers, words did something. Words brought all this overwhelming stuff that made no sense to the page in a way that felt honoring and um, supportive, and we could be heard. And
Was
I
that
don't
validated by any adults at school or around you,
later,
relatives or? Yeah.
but when I was young, it was just between me and I very early on. Well, I had one experience, which I'm just going to talk about. Why not? I had a very, awful abusive experience.
Mhm.
And I left my body because it was so painful. And I was very, very young. I had this experience of leaving above my body and feeling what I would call, God, though I'm not a traditional in my beliefs in any way, but I would, let's just say the light, these two
Uh-huh.
hands hold me. And all I heard was, "You're not your body. You're not."
Yes.
And that, to be honest, I remembered that it happened, but I also kind of blinked it out of my mind. Does that make sense? So
Yeah. What age are you talking about here?
5.5, five
Okay.
and
All right.
And then through therapy and stuff, I was able to reconstruct and go back and pull together the pieces, and then got validation outside from
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the police department, other people who helped me put that. And that's the whole puzzle that I'm writing about. Actually, at 65, I'm finally able to really write about that and even talk about it. I would have never, I think you may be the second podcast person I've talked about that. So honestly, I'm just
Hmm.
be able to. Anyway, so I had this sense that there was a voice that would hear me.
Yes.
there was a voice that would hear me beyond my own aloneness. And so that happened. It was a very compelling thing that happened to me. And words were the thing that kept me from kind of going crazy or, really being in a lot of emotional pain. And then I had another very powerful event when I was 6. I was walking through the woods. So at the time we were living, this goes back a little bit. We were living in Providence, Rhode Island. And I was walking in the woods. We were visiting some friends of the family. And I came upon someone that now we would call a homeless person. At the time, we called them a hobo.
Hmm.
The person had just passed away. They
Oh.
just passed away. And I'll never forget, there were like cans around them. And I just remember, and it was terrifying, right? Finding this. But I remember looking back. And while I was having my own experience of feeling really alone in the world and not having a voice and not being heard, I remember thinking, God, it must have been terrible to die alone and not been heard.
Hmm.
And there was this immediate kind of, how do you say, compassion or understanding of what it's like to have a voice that's not heard.
Hmm.
And then I totally forgot about all this. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like every day of my life I was like, oh, yes, I've got this mission about being heard. It
Yeah.
wasn't like that. But those were, I think sometimes we have these like semi-conscious experiences that then motivate us. And so, anyway, then we moved to Berkeley actually after that, but it was still, there was a lot of confusion in my early years back east. So we came to Berkeley and I just had a love for language. I had a love for
Did you
language.
move there because your parents were related to the university?
No,
Yeah.
no, my mother was an artist, and that was the place to go, right?
So was it
Oh,
the summer of love, that kind of thing, going to
it was the summer of love, exactly.
wearing flowers in your hair if you go to San Francisco?
And my mother, and God bless them because
Yeah,
you can understand the yearning and that they had
sure. I got
to.
there later, but I lived in Berkeley. And
Ah,
do you know where the Rockridge BART station is on College Avenue?
yeah.
Um, our Dominican headquarters is right there. And so I was there from 1980 to 1985. And then I would take the bus up college and across campus to, where the Graduate Theological is on the north
Oh,
side of Cal?
I know it very well. It's a beautiful. I know.
That's where I did my
Oh,
theology studies.
it's a beautiful place.
That's an old stomping ground for me.
Oh, it's so wonderful. I love it. Actually, I used to live around the corner from there when I went to Berkeley. I had a beautiful little studio apartment right near GTU, and a lot of people dear to me over the years that have either worked there part time or gone to.
Sure.
But so Berkeley is a great place, and my parents were wonderful people. I mean, we're all. I mean, we're all as parents make mistakes, and anyway. So
Did you start an undergraduate career at Cal or somewhere else?
yeah, at Cal.
Yeah.
That's where I went, and I studied linguistics. I studied with the best. I looked at cognitive science, and the other piece that happened, that just to tie those other pieces together, is I was diagnosed with kind of a learning disability or dyslexia, or I really had troubles. Even though I loved to write and stuff, I would find that I learned really differently, and I would reverse things and so forth when I would think. So I also noticed while I loved language, I did really wacky things with it,
Uh,
and I had problems with it. And so I really became curious about how the mind works and how we process language. So
yes.
that's why I went to cognitive linguistics at Berkeley. And very early on in my, I had to go to community college. I didn't do well in high school. So I went to a community college and I started tutoring there with adults who had difficulty reading and writing
Uh-huh.
and really fell in love with literacy work and saw and kind of identified because I understood how life can kick you around and those things that seem like such natural processes like just learn how to read and write aren't always so
That
easy, right?
easy. Yeah.
So I went on and I wanted to work with language, but mostly in terms of helping people read and write and empowering people in people who maybe didn't have some of the advantages that some of us do in terms of really being empowered in terms of language. So that was kind of my mission, and then um, I got another master's degree in educational psychology, and I
Before
became
you go further, did you get an undergraduate degree and can you get a
Mhm.
BA or is it a
Yeah,
BS?
yeah,
What
I
was
did.
the
It was
undergrad degree?
BS in linguistics
Okay. All right.
with a specialization in cognitive linguistics, and I was bilingual. I was bilingual, so I studied Spanish.
And by that time, did you just stay at Cal and move into a master's program?
No, I transferred to SF State. And
Okay.
and then I did Hayward, Cal State Hayward,
Uh,
and the learning specialist. I became a learning specialist. And again, my interest in language was to help people. You know, it was just I was just a teacher,
yes.
basically a learning specialist. And I wanted to empower people because language for me was so empowering emotionally, but also in the world, right?
Yes.
It's power, right? To be
Sure.
able to read and write and speak. So that's what I did. I was a reading specialist. I was very intrigued with the connection between abuse and learning disabilities, and there was a lot of connection there. And so I became very passionate about doing research in that area, and I started directing literacy programs in the Bay Area. I was the county for the Napa County of Napa. I was a literacy director there. So, you know, really my work was all about empowering people with language, because for me, that was the link that allowed me to find clarity and power and sanity in my own sense of
Yes.
right. So it was a great job. I had a great career. You know, I really loved what I did. I really loved what I did. And then something happened. I watched my father die, and I thought, holy camole, what
And how old were you when he was dying?
52.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so I had really no, I mean, this whole career, I never thought, I mean, you know, up until then, if you told me end of life or hospice, I would have looked at you and gone, well, that's nice that, like, you know, other people are doing
Somebody
that.
else does that.
Yeah.
By that time, you had a daughter at least. I don't know the rest of your family. You have other children or just the one
Just
daughter?
one.
All
Mhm.
right. So, uh, and had your mom passed by that time?
Just my father. So my father passed away when I was 52.
Uh-huh.
I made one of the craziest, most wonderful, impulsive decisions of my life. My daughter was just 17. And after I saw my father's process and was just completely smitten by the prospect of doing this work, um, synchronistically, coincidentally, I was at temple with my mother, and a friend of ours had mentioned. He said, "How you doing after your dad passed away?" And I said, "I'm okay, but you know, it's hard." And I've become obsessed with final words. I'm really intrigued. I saw this stuff with my dad, and you know, and he said, "Wow, you know, I work with Raymond Moody, and maybe you should. I'm doing a workshop in Alabama for 5 days. Maybe you should come." And I'm like, "Well, how much does it cost?"
Yeah.
And you know, he told me, like, I don't know.
Who is that you're talking about? Who's the middle person in there?
Bruce Silverman,
Okay.
wonderful, wonderful human being. And so I said, "I'm not too sure." Well, as the universe would have it, that week I got this huge, unexpected tax refund.
Oh, yeah.
It was like $2,100
Like
or
a
something,
ticket to Alabama, it sounds like.
like a ticket to Alabama. So I jumped on the plane and didn't really know what I was doing, except all I wanted to do was learn about final words and to try to make sense of what happened to my dad. And um, and I think on some level, now that we've talked, is I was trying to make sense, I think, of what happened to me when I was 5 and 6, that I never was sort of
Yes.
self-conscious.
Right.
Again, it wasn't really that conscious in me until later anyway, when it became clear and I did some therapy around it. But anyway, so um, there I was in Alabama. I met Raymond Moody. There was only 15 of us in this beautiful lodge up in the hills of Alabama. It was really beautiful.
Hmm.
And the fourth day, Raymond Moody said, yeah, well, people don't know this, but my first PhD was in philosophy. And what I really fell in love with was unintelligible nonsense, you know, language. I
Yes.
was a net language guy, and my ears perked up. And he said, you know, and I've always been kind of interested in people's final words. And that's
Oh,
close to
boy.
what you had said
Then you
earlier.
knew that you were in the right spot.
And I'm like, I just couldn't believe it. It was
And
one of
that's
those,
become a kind of very late in life fascination with him. You helped him write a book on nonsense, didn't you?
yeah, I
Yeah.
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
making
I
sense.
interviewed him and you know, I'm always interested in with people with long careers. What haven't you done yet that you want to do, or what are you most excited about this minute? And that's what it was, is nonsense language.
I was so honored. I mean, what an honor, you know, because Raymond Moody is, I think, one of the brightest human beings on the planet. It was 2012 when we first started having conversations.
I want
Was
to go back to something before you go too far from it. You mentioned being at Temple with your mom. When you were at Temple with your mom, or was there ever in the place where you and others gathered, synagogue, was there a was it possible to talk about an afterlife, or was that not a safe topic?
That's a really great question. Well, my father would roll his eyes, just like, oh my God, and at Temple, hmm, I didn't even think of talking about it. I mean, I wasn't even far along enough in all this to be convinced of anything. I just heard weird stuff that my dad said. I didn't even bridge it. I mean, I didn't even say, like, oh, wow, I just witnessed something that makes me think there's an afterlife. I was so not there yet. It's like, oh my God, my dad said this really, really weird stuff. And as a linguist, I believe that language reveals so much about who we are and consciousness. So I can't dismiss what I witnessed, dismiss it. But and yeah, I didn't talk about the afterlife. I mean, words like eternal soul, I mean, not to be disrespectful to you and what your background might be, but in my family, that was like just hocus hocus weird stuff. Both of my parents, they were artists and open-minded in many ways, but this whole God, Christian, all that stuff was the thing of dogmas and the thing of oppression and not free, right?
Yeah.
And that was Berkeley, right? The talk, it just it wasn't part of the conversation, and my parents belonged to a very kind of progressive, wild, you know, um, temple. I shouldn't say wild, but very free and
Yeah.
open, progressive. So
Right.
it just wasn't part of the conversation. And if I had even used the word afterlife, I just think people would have rolled their eyes at that time.
Well, thanks for letting me know. Much of my career has been campus ministry, and I was at Stanford for 7 years, and there's only one brand of Catholic, except inside it, there's all kinds of us. But then within American Judaism, you've got, three or four different denominational headings. And so when I worked with colleagues from anywhere in the whole spectrum of Judaism, I would wait and listen to hear if there was anything that might have afterlife involved in it.
Exactly. And precisely. And the way I was brought up, and it's still very much a part of my DNA, is you express the sacred or whatever the sacred by your good deeds. And so, I was, even with working for the literacy, literacy work I did in the prisons and drug rehab centers and just everywhere I, worked. For me, it was all about you take your blessings and you share them. And so that was what, if you want to talk about an afterlife, it's based in the work you left behind you. I mean, that's why, I went into this whole thing. I wasn't trying to prove an afterlife. I mean, none of this was part of. However, I had that weird experience of leaving my body and looking down.
Yes. Yeah.
So that gave me and my life a slightly different flavor than my parents.
Early on at 5.5.
Early on, and it really gave me this very profound sense. I didn't know the words for it. I didn't know the name for it. I didn't know how to frame it, but I did know, and I'll tell you something. I knew that when I went through my hardest stuff, I always felt someone was hearing me when I was writing.
Yes.
I always felt it. And
Even in the closet. Well, let's go back to Alabama, because Raymond Moody is one of the most extraordinary people alive. You kind of on a chance, because you get a check in the mail, have a ticket, and you end up there, and then he comes out with a very passion that you're beginning to think you might make a life out of.
yeah, it was just, the reason why I've come now to believe in something bigger than myself, though I wasn't raised that way necessarily. I always did. I grew up in the importance of love and so forth, but not a higher power or what, when things come together like this, it's just how can you not live in wonder of them? That's how,
Yes. Yeah. Call it
and
whatever you want, but it's wonderful.
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one thing, my mother used to sign all her emails, "Stay amazed," and I really love
Oh,
that that phrase. So Yeah, so we knew right away. It was, it was like falling in love intellectually. We both knew right away that there was something really, and that was in May of 2012. By December, um, my car was packed. My husband at the time agreed. He was from, this is the other, you want to hear some more crazy coincidences. Raymond was from Macon, Georgia, and my ex-husband was from Raymond. I'm from Macon, and he just always wanted to go back to Georgia. So my sweet daughter just decided to stay in California. She actually started living with my mom, which is great because my mother get to have her granddaughter with her. And she was, going to school and doing all the things a 17-year-old does. And I just sold everything. I mean, my friends were looking at me. I had a county job. I was making decent money. I had a pension if I had hung in there, a good pension. I got to pursue final words. And it was insane. I mean, it was it was an insane thing to do. And I would not have traded it in for anything because first I got to work with Raymond. I learned about near death experiences. I got to step into this incredible realm of words at the threshold. And I was, I mean, I got a spiritual connection and I got to work with people that I had never, ever, never had dreamt of working with.
And he
So
was also the child of parents that were not church folk or temple folk. They were, I don't know, intellectuals or scientists or something.
very, very similar. So we both had this kind of orientation of kind of being skeptics or, at least not believers in a certain way. Um, And I was with him, in the time that I worked with him, one day he literally said, I'm convinced. Called me, had just met Evan Alexander. He was like, oh my, I just got a phone call. I just talked to this amazing, it was like, I just talked to this amazing doctor. You would not believe the story he has. And in the time that we worked together, I'll just never forget. I mean, over a period of months, he said, I just, I'm convinced. I'm convinced now. I'm convinced. So, it was such a blessed thing for me to be right there and to have the conversations I had with him. And it's almost like now, I had to move back to California, take care of family, a sick daughter and a dying mother. Um, I came back out here, but now I'm really looking back to that period of my life, those years with Raymond. I'm still reflecting on the conversations we had and just like, wow, what a blessing.
When I went looking for you online to just to do a little homework before this interview, I found you mostly through Life After Life, Raymond Moody's site. Uh, you're still very much a part of his fold.
I had to, yeah, I mean, I started, really built the website and now someone has sort of taken over the administration of it because I'm not able to, but he's been so generous in keeping me involved in it because, you had mentioned earlier about kind of the connections we have with other people in this field. There's kind of, it's almost like there are connections that are so deep. And I just when I had to attend to the medical concerns of both my mother and daughter, it was very hard for me to leave the website behind and leave that work behind. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. It's the next thing that I've been called to do. Actually, can I just tell you one more thing about that?
I hope you will.
I doing this work with Raymond and doing the final words work, and what I kept hearing from people who had near death experiences, and also people as they were nearing life, is that really what life is about is love, right? I
Yes.
kept hearing over and over again that it's lessons of love that we're here for. That is what we're here for. And a as I did this work, I looked at myself and looked at all the ways that I'm so limited in my ability to love. There were so many ways that I didn't love as fully and as much as I had hoped for. And it was really funny because when I started to pray more and more as I did this work, started having a deeper connection to what I call source.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that I asked for was to to learn how to love. So if someone cuts in front of me on the freeway, I'm not gonna
Yes. Yeah. They must be in a hurry. I hope they get there safely. Uh,
So, one of my prayers was, the next step of the NDE work is not just to talk about what people are having in the afterlife, but again, I think part of this is my Jewish training in part. So now that we know those are the lessons we're here for, how the heck do we realize those day to day, right?
Yes.
How the heck, when your husband says something that drives you crazy, do you listen to his perspective, right? So it was really strange because I had these prayers and hopes for myself to evolve and become a more loving person without denying the darkness in life, right? Not
Mhm.
do spiritual bypass, but accept the reality that there is darkness in the world, and how do we have a voice, again, have a voice and speak the word of love, and also acknowledge what's real and dark in the world. Or anyway, what happened is my mother and my daughter both at the same time became very, very, very ill and needed a caregiver. And I feel like these last 2 years have just been hands on. My mother did pass away in February. My daughter, God bless her, 30 years old, is still bedridden after getting COVID and becoming very, very ill. If there was 6 months, she couldn't even talk anymore. I lost her, I almost lost her completely. And and of course, there have been many days I've been pissed off about it. Many days I've really missed being part of the NDE community. This is one of the few podcasts I've done in the last few years, because I've kind of dropped off the face of the earth because I had two people I love very much to tend to. And, but, you know, those times where I keep praying and saying, "What's up?" Guess what I've learned to do a hell of a lot better in the last 2 years. I've learned a lot more about love,
I bet you have.
In the middle of all this, I meet this guy online after my other husband left me, and I'm learning about love with him too. So I guess what I'm saying is, you know, the 10 years, 12 years with Raymond Moody and doing that work with the Life After Life community was so magical. And I learned so much about spirit and source and the power of love and the lessons, words at the threshold, hearing what people are saying at the end of their lives, seeing the breakthroughs and the shifts people have as they're dying. And even my own mother, asked me for forgiveness as she was dying. You know, I feel very much that where I am is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Don't pass over that too quickly. Words at the Threshold was really your breakthrough book, right? That was the that was you talk a lot about communicating and finding your voice. That was really your voice on a large stage after the work that you did to bring that topic to consciousness.
It's really true. I mean, I've written other books, and it was the book that broke through. And yeah, it's really true. And it did. And it was wonderful to have a platform. And absolutely.
While we're on that, what are a few key insights, bullet points? Because there are certainly people in this audience that are with someone who is in hospice or maybe moving in and out of dementia, and how speech is affected by that and so on. What are some key insights that you discovered in your research?
Um, I feel that the threshold words are different than dementia, but I'll share some of the where there's some overlap because I feel they're very different. Yeah, it's really they're very different, and where there's commonality is about, how we began this conversation with children is with at words at the threshold. What I would say is that first, people often enter into much more metaphoric language. They start talking about trips that they're going to take.
Yes.
They start talking about a momentous event or some big event that's coming, a big dance, big golf game. For my father, it was the big art show. My mother was an artist. She was used to
Uh-huh.
that. So first, you're going to hear a lot of metaphor. And, one of the things I really encourage people to think about is they're entering kind of a different world. Think you're going to a foreign country. And,
Yeah.
if you're Chinese in a foreign country, you're not going to judge it and try to pick up the jewels and the nuances. So, walk into the realm of the threshold with an open mind and open heart and listen to the language and don't judge it, don't be afraid of it, and imagine it's all sacred. And so listen to for the metaphors. There are something called sustained narratives where people over time tell a story. So in isolation, you may not know they're telling a story. So maybe on Thursday night, Grandpa might say, the boxer just came into my room, and I'm like, whatever, Grandpa, whatever the boxer, And but then if you write down over a period, that might be 2 days later, he said, yeah, that boxer has been a good friend to me for a long time.
Uh,
And if you track these sustained narratives, oftentimes when people are dying, if you track them, you'll see there's kind of this trajectory that goes on. There's a pathway. And then it might be like, yeah, well, the box is going to help me go into the ring. Oh, when are you going to go to the ring? I'm going to go to the ring in 2 days. And
uh,
you know what I mean? So there are these sustained narratives. And that's why this whole idea of consciousness really grabbed me, because a mind that's dying, that's supposed to not be working, somehow these storylines are threading. And they often have to do with people entering into this new world, right? This
yeah.
other world. So, there's a lot of language that people might hear that may seem nonsensical, metaphorical. My dad said to me, there's so much so in sorrow, right? That doesn't make sense logically, but what incredible language and what beauty in terms of poetry. So, in terms of words at the threshold, I really invite people to listen with their ears open, their hearts open, and to find the connecting points. And even if they're things that seem scary or don't make sense, try to find the ways, just like you would with the same kind of wonder and awe as you might with a child. And
Yeah.
um, and so that's one thing I would say.
Did you keep a notepad? Did you write stuff down? You mean you're a writer after all?
That's exactly what I did. I mean, once the very first couple days, what happened with my dad is he walked out the front door as he started the dying process in underwear one night. He walked
Hmm.
down the stairs and the cops obviously stopped him. It was late at night, and he said, I'm going to the big art show with boxes. I'm going to the big art show with boxes for my wife. And all these years, he would help my mom bring boxes to art shows.
Uh,
The cops, of course, thought he was crazy and, brought him to the hospital and managed to track down who he was. But that was the first thing that made me think, what the heck was my dad talking about? Art show, why? And then from that day on, when I was at his bedside, when he finally came home, um, I just wrote down everything he said. And that's how I started culling these things. So I encouraged people when I was doing the final words work to have like a notepad by their loved one's bed. And
yes.
just when people would come in, stand vigil or be right there, just write down things that they heard. We could start seeing patterns.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah.
So it
And
wasn't just your own private little journal. You had sort of like a guest book where people could write down whatever they heard while they were visiting.
yeah, and that I found was the best way. Because, one of the ethical questions was, we didn't, intellectually, oh, we should have voice recorders at their bedside. But then the ethical thing is, people have really important things to say at end of life, and that was completely unethical. So the journal allowed us to track language. And
Yeah.
I am the first to admit that the words we got, it wasn't completely scientific. There are probably so many things we didn't hear, but people were able to share the things that they heard, and just, things like mom, or, someone saying, can you hear those bells ringing? Can you hear those bells ringing? And to be open to like, no, what bells? Tell me about the bells, mom. Tell me
Yeah.
about the bells. And as a linguist, I've always had, and Raymond Moody shares this kind of a sense of wonder about language, right?
Yes.
So I really encourage people if they can, because sometimes it's scary when people we love they're not making sense, or we think they're not making sense. But to keep an open mind and just imagine that maybe they are in a different realm, or in the context of their own experience, they might be making sense, right?
Sure.
Or maybe there's something else that's going on that is not about making sense, right? That maybe as we shift dimensions, there's a process that, Raymond talks about this. It's like switching dials on a radio.
Yes.
So maybe as we go from this frequency to another frequency, there's kind of a destabilization, and nonsense is a reflection of that destabilization or that shifting of frequencies. So,
Yeah. A lot of the work that my prayer partners and I have done is involves speech with people that have died. And so they're sometimes describing to us using speech uh, the world that they entered when they left here. Or it's certainly there's a continuum, but there's also a veil. There's also something that separates this than that. And then people are in the new thing, and then they're trying to make sense of it because they don't have a previous experience of it. So it's a brand new place, and I need to figure this out the way that when you move to a new place, you don't know where the drugstore is. You don't know where the post office is. There's an orientation to a new place, and for a while, it's not going to make sense because nothing is where it used to be.
Well, one of the things that we found in our research, one of the most common types of language that we saw was non-referential. Well, people were taught to make reference to something that wasn't clear. So let me give you an example. For example, first I start with my father, then I'll give you some other ones. But my dad said to me, oh, yeah, I mean, to his editor, he was talking on the phone to someone who did some editing. This is very interesting, Alice. I've never done this before. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, what is the this he's talking about?
Yes.
Right? So that disorientation, or things like, it's not what you think. And I got that several times as a sample of someone. Someone else said, too bad I can't tell you of all of this, someone said to their daughter. Um, Someone else said, I don't know whether the far away goes anywhere, but I use it so much. I feel like it's the dirtiest raindrop I could find. And again, there's no referential. We don't know what the person's referring to. So that non-referential language has to do with exactly what you were describing. There's this kind of disorientation, right? People, there's a this, but we don't really know what the this is. And they may
Yeah.
not know either, but we certainly don't know always either, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Have you had any like energetic experience of your dad since he died?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. And matter of fact, right, I was gonna grab a book of poems. He about I guess a month after he died, I was praying and writing in my journal, and then I just heard him say, "Your mom's in terrible, terrible grief, and I would like to write some poems. Will you take them down for me?"
Oh,
And there were like 52 poems in a period of about 7 months that I have a collection of poems, and they're beautiful. And they gave my mother incredible comfort. And the amazing thing is, he made references to things that I should have never known about. And she was like, "Oh my God, he mentioned the this."
oh, okay. All right.
And so there are all these poems that I shared with my mother over the course of the year that brought her a lot of comfort, and they're beautiful poems. And I published them under the title Veil, but
Yes.
Lisa Smartt with Morton Felix.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When about 3 or 4 minutes ago, he tapped on me. That's what
Oh,
I was asking.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
For
how
me, that's often of the five senses is most like touch. And that's why I call it tapping. And it was right here, just above the heart on the shoulder here. That's where I often get that. There's a lot of love for you.
oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you
so
so
what
much.
have you not done that you want to do?
Um, what I've not done, uh, I've written a lot. Um, and honestly, some of them I didn't want to publish while my parents were alive. One of the books my mother asked me not to publish while she was alive.
Uh-huh.
Um, while she was dying, she um, she was very, very sick, and obviously. And one day she was in discomfort, and uh, an ambulance came. The fireman came, and I'll answer this question. I promise you. Anyway, um, anyways, they were all there. These gorgeous firemen. She loved men. She loved gorgeous men. My mom perked up when the firemen came in.
Uh,
We were ready to take her out, and she said, "Hold on, before you take me, I need to apologize to my daughter, and I want witness. I want witness to it, and I want her to know that anything she needs to say about what happened, she has my blessings now." And that was an unbelievable moment. And I felt like she was telling me it's okay to put out the books with everything.
okay.
A light just went on behind you. But anyway, So my mother gave her a blessing. So anyway, I have actually 3 books that I've written, about things that I knew that they, you know. And then I wrote a musical. Um, it was a really hard few years. I decided to play some music because I found that music could offer me comfort in a way that words couldn't. So I wrote a musical, and I would love that to get out into the world.
Wouldn't that be sweet? What's it called?
It's called The Sensei's Wife, and it was about my former marriage,
Uh-huh.
and also Raymond Moody's in it. It's about yeah, I call him Professor Afterlife in,
Oh, all right. All
in
right.
the musical.
Uh,
So I just finished it actually a month ago. It's 16 songs and 200 pages of script. And
good for you. Good
yes,
for
I
you.
am looking for a musical collaborator, someone who, I mean, I have a little bit of music in me, but anyone who's interested in musical theater should give me a call if they
Okay. Well, somebody's going to.
like.
Good for you.
So yeah, so that's what I'd hoped for, and then I learned to love better, and that whatever gifts I have, that I'm 60, I'm going to be 66 soon, and life is short. This life is short. I want
Yeah.
to do what I'm meant to do here and do it well.
How do you even, let me tell you what I think about love and see how that resonates with you. I was taught very early on that God is love,
Mm,
that God isn't just lovable, and it's not just a behavior that God exhibits. It's God is love. And I've lived on campuses all my life, and I still haven't found one that has a love building.
mm,
There's not a loveology department anywhere in sight. But nobody would deny that it exists, it is a real thing, and that it's important. But we can only seem to study it uh, in some sort of bank shot, some sort of other way in. And I just think we breathe it. If God is love and God is everywhere, God is outside you, inside you, above, below, behind, within, and that do fish believe in water? Um, we're just in love all the time. And if we can just calm down, maybe that's what was going on in the closet when you were 5.5. You were in love in the closet. You were surrounded by it or breathing it in or whatever. I just think we're always in the presence of love that because there's no other alternative.
So, and you've made me think about how, for me, language is I feel like all language is an expression of love in a certain way, that there's a way, even, I mean, do I think angry words are an expression? But part of what you were saying about breath, and we are breathing love, and language is so close to love, but it's not. It's funny. I've thought a lot about it. Like, do words keep us from that breathing and feeling of love, or do they help us join it? And they can do both, right?
Yes, they can. It depends on your attitude, what you're doing with them.
Yeah, and really choosing carefully. But I love what you said about loveology. And, I'm learning, there are things, very basic things we can learn about how to love better. Very simple things like you're not saying F you to someone. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly. Blessing the person that cut you off in the highway.
right. But it's not as simple as it sounds, it
Uh,
really is. And, even I think I have realized now that I've had to care for my mother and my daughter, and at one time, upstairs my daughter was ill and downstairs my mother was dying, going between the two, it was really taxing. And how do we love and take care of ourselves? How do we stay connected to our higher powers so that we're able to give freely to others and also give to ourselves? In theory, it's a wonderful thing, but in practice, how do you do that? How do you do that? And, that's been kind of my quest in the last few years. And I hear what you're saying and I agree. But on a very practical level, does it mean I drink 7 cups of water a day and
yeah,
stay
right, right. How do I do
hydrated?
that? Yeah, you still have a task list and people who need you to do things and all that. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, I think what I'm thinking about a lot and writing, I'm very far from being saint, very far. And I'm very clear about that. And how do I keep the love flowing when I'm tired? How do I keep the love flowing when I'm resentful? How do I not get resentful? So, it's become very brass tacks Went from this very elevated conversations that I had with Dr. Moody and with others, which I totally believe in. And but then now the questions I'm asking myself are much more practical. Like, okay, when I get off the podcast, I have to go feed my daughter. How do I care for a daughter who's very ill and disabled? How do I fight with disability and get a little money to
Is
help?
she, is your daughter able to speak?
Now she
Okay.
can.
That, because that's so important to you, you know?
I know the first 6 months she couldn't. And
Yeah.
it really, talk about lessons in love for a linguist, I mean, lessons in love for a linguist was how do I know that she loves me, how to express my love. It was like going back to when she was a baby, but now she was 28.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes I think of just the physics of language and speech, the fact that, like right now, you and I are in different states, but we're taking breath and pushing it past vocal cords, combining it with our ideas and putting it into a microphone and then sending it across the internet and into a recording that other people are going to listen to in a different way. And even when I'm preaching, because I'm a preacher, there's a difference between speech as self-expression or communication. Because a person can get in front of a crowd and just talk about whatever they want without any reference to who's in front of them, which is self-expression, but it's not communication, not if it's not paying attention to who's listening. And if it's not altruistic in some way, if you're not trying to make things better or better understood or something to somehow benefit the hearer, you're kind of taking up their time. They could be doing something more profitable listening to you rattle on. Uh, but then it means your own ideas are going inside their body into ear canals and bouncing off uh, eardrums, and just the physics of language and speech is fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, well, it's what we said earlier, where words can join us and words can separate. Certain acts like touch or caress or embrace or breathing or staying still, that there's no separation in that, right? There's no separation in those things. So I understand the limits of language also.
And you and I are both authors, and we belong to a common Judeo-Christian tradition that starts when you open page one of God's book. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was spoken, and things come to be because the Word entered in, and so on. All of that mystery we, swim in.
That's no, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And we really have to choose our words quickly and how many words we say and how quickly we say them. Oh God, there's such an art. I started out when I first started studying linguistics at Berkeley. I started with uh, Robin Lakoff, who specialized in the difference between men's language and women's language. There's this
Uh-huh.
quality that men and women spoke. It's interesting because women would generally hedge, not be as direct. They would maybe ask, well, like what I just did. They have a question mark, like "lovely
Yeah,
day, isn't it?"
yeah, uh-huh, yeah,
So, the way we speak, I just think it's really good to be mindful of how we speak and who the audience is and what you had said. As a writer, I know you got to think about who your audience is. You've got to shape your book and your words for who you're talking to, right? So that's for everyone in our lives. And I think that's part of love. I mean, part of love is thinking, who are you talking to?
yes,
Today, I was much more open about myself because I'm imagining the people who listen would be listening with an open heart and with
yes.
a and would be so you have to think about who you're listening to and who you're speaking to. Yeah, and that is part of being a loving person, I think.
Well, we're nearly at the end, and I want to make sure. One thing I want to ask is on your website, you are telling the world that you are doing coaching and especially writing coaching.
Mhm.
Are you taking new clients? If there are people that are trying to get a book published, are you somebody that would help them do that?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, actually, I am working part-time and a couple of my clients are just finishing up books. So I am going to have some openings in the next few months. And I love book coaching. It's such a pleasure and an honor. So Thank you for asking that.
Sure. I've had my sister as my book coach for 4 books. I also had one other person who helped with one of them, but have that all going on right in the family. I know the importance of it.
I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Well, you're all about final words. Do you have a final word for this podcast?
I just say go gently. Life is really a miracle. Life is miraculous, and anything can happen. Anything can happen,
Sure.
from the very good to the very challenging, and just go gently. That's all I can
Go
say.
gently. Okay. And how can any member of this audience be in touch with you?
Um, through lifeafterlife.com, through the finalwordsproject.org, or you can email me directly at smartcoaching, SMARTT, coaching, COACHING, at gmail.com, smart coaching.
Well, what fun. This was an hour that flew by.
Bye-bye.
All right. That does it for this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. We're grateful that you joined us today. Remember that I'm praying for you, whether you're listening or watching, and whatever it is that's dearest to your heart, that's where I want my prayers to go. So that's it for now. Join us next time on the Joyful Friar podcast. God bless you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.